They don't like you very much. That was kind of a dead hello. Alright, so we're at 125. This is Unit 8, Period 7. And this is cells and viruses. So we're doing B4C, and it's continued. So I'm gonna cram this page full. So write small. So B4C, we already did the part where it talks about compare the structures of viruses to cells. We already did that part, so we're picking up right here where it says describe viral reproduction. So describe viral reproduction, and it's weird, and describe the role of viruses in causing diseases. And they specifically want to know, they specifically stated the HIV virus, the flu virus, and I'm going to throw in COVID, since, it's here. So we're going to focus on those 3 viruses especially. So the first and foremost thing I want you to write up here is viruses can't reproduce on their own. Always keep that in mind. They're not alive. Even though I'm going to throw in some terms like, oh, we got to kill them, or this is how they do, or blah, blah, blah. I'm going to use some of those terms that we associate with living things. You keep in the back of your mind that, no, they're not alive. We're just using those terms for convenience, okay? So viruses can't reproduce on their own. They don't grow. They don't eat. They don't reproduce. They don't have those processes of life. Okay, so let's talk about viral reproduction. Okay, they have to reproduce in a host cell. So they must reproduce, and I'm going to abbreviate that, in a host cell. Okay, so by host, I mean exactly what it sounds like. It means you're the one that's giving them food, so you're the hostess or the host. You supply them with everything that they need. In this case, you're really just supplying them with a way to reproduce, and that's it. So the thing about the host cell is it's usually very specific. I'm going to use the phrase species specific, because generally viruses don't jump species. Like parvo. Dogs can get this deadly disease called parvo. Have you guys heard of that one? Parvo? Yeah. It doesn't get into humans. You can be around dogs that have parvo all you want, and you're not going to get that disease. Kennel cough. Have you heard of that one? Kennel cough. Before you put your dogs in a kennel where other dogs are, you better get them treated for kennel cough. So it's a vaccine. It's actually a nasal spray for the kennel cough. You can't get that one. You're not going to start coughing because you're around it. So there are a lot of viruses. The vast majority of them can't jump from one type of organism to another. They're very, very specific in what host they're in, what kind of organism they're in. Okay? Those proteins, the little receptor proteins on the outside, are very specific about what chemicals they attach to. And your proteins on the outside of your cells that can attach to the viruses that the viruses attach to are not the same proteins that are on the outside of, say, a dog cell. So if we were to say, well, if I need a liver transplant, why can't I just take, like a dog liver and transplant it into me? Because your body would kill it. And there's no way. They can't even suppress the immune system enough to keep it alive in there. It would just, you'd die from that. Even if you got a transplant from another human, like a liver transplant, which is how we do, even then, your body still tries to kill it. So someone who's had a transplant has to stay on immunosuppressant drugs, chemicals that lower their immune system, stop it from working, so that their body doesn't kill that liver that's inside it, because it's not you. So the chemicals that are on the outside of your cells are not the exact same as the chemicals that are on the outside of mine, and they're significantly different from the chemicals that are on the outside of another animal, like a dog or a pig or something. So the viruses are typically very, very host specific. There are a few exceptions to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. So the first thing is they attach to a host cell. So you've got the virus in you, they attach to a host cell. That's what those little proteins are. Those little receptors. They call them glycoproteins on that one. So those little bitty proteins, the little things that stick out, those are all going to be used for attachment there. And they inject the nucleic acid into the cell. And again, these are all chemical reactions that are happening. They do all sorts of weird stuff. So they inject the nucleic acid into the cell. The protein part of it, the protein coat and the receptors, they stay on the outside of your cell. That's how your immune system recognizes that that cell is infected. So when your immune system's fighting stuff, trying to get you healthy again, it has to kill every single one of your cells that are infected, right? If it doesn't kill those infected cells, then it hasn't killed off all the virus stuff. So those virus proteins are on the outside, the little virus empty shells are on the outside of your cell, and that's how your immune system knows, yep, we got to kill that one. So once they get the nucleic acid into your cell, how important is nucleic acid to your cell? DNA, RNA, important or eh? Yeah, it's incredibly important, right? And your cell understands that. It's like, holy crap, that's DNA, that's nucleic acid, I've got to grab it and take care of it. So in many cases, the nucleic acid is transported, it's grabbed by the cell, and a lot of times it's taken to the nucleus. And I'm going to put in parentheses, and taken to nucleus. In most cases, that's exactly what it does. Prokaryotes can also be hit by viruses, and they don't even have a nucleus, so that's why I'm going to put that in parentheses. Whether it's RNA or DNA, it's going to be taken into the nucleus because that's where it is. That's where it functions. Once it's in the nucleus, it goes through two possible pathways. Okay, the first one is called the lytic pathway. This is the fast one. This is typically what you guys are familiar with. You get exposed to a virus, you get sick, right? That's the lytic pathway. So basically what happens is the virus DNA reproduces rapidly. So when you talk about the lytic pathway, you have the virus DNA produces viruses rapidly. Okay, so the virus injected its DNA into you. Your cells are saying, holy crap, that's DNA. And basically it does what it tells it to. So here, the DNA that it got into it says, make this. And so that's exactly what your cells does. So the virus is basically co-opted. It's taken over your cell mechanism, and it's causing it to make viruses. And it's making a buttload of viruses. The cell follows these instructions. That's how it's making them. That cell that's infected fills up with viruses, so much so that it stops the processes, whatever that cell's supposed to be doing, it stops it, and then it ultimately explodes open. Thousands of viruses come out of that, and every single one of those viruses can go and attack another cell. So the cell fills up with viruses. It explodes open and dies, releasing the viruses. And when enough of your cells die, you feel sick. Generally, that takes, for this fast process, takes anywhere from 7 to 14 days. That's it. Enough of your, by the end of that time, by the end of about Usually it's 7 to 10, but it can stretch. By the end of that 14 days, you are feeling sick because your cells are dying. And then your immune system kicks in, and it's going to kill off even more cells because it's got to kill off those infected cells. It's got to kill them all off. So once your immune system kicks in, you're going to feel worse, but ultimately you have to feel worse to get better on that end. So it generally takes this process between 7 and 14 days to happen. Not very long at all. And 1 or 2 cells, you don't feel it. 10 or 20 cells, you don't feel it. When thousands of your cells die, then you feel it. What type of cell does the virus attack? Depends. Some of them attack your respiratory system, so you're going to have a cough, you're going to have mucus buildup, right? You're going to have a head cold or maybe a flu virus or something like that. Sometimes they attack the intestines, and so maybe you'll have diarrhea. You have a stomach virus, a stomach bug. People talk about that. Yeah, so it just depends on what types of cells the virus attacks. There are some viruses that attack your spinal cord and the linings around your brain, which are really, really bad. Okay, the second type of pathway is called the lysogenic pathway. This was a weird one. I mean, this one we're all familiar with. The lytic pathway, everybody knows that one because that's what's happening the vast majority of the time. This one is slow. So up here, with the fast one, it could be 7 to 14 days. Right? Down here, we're talking years. You don't even know you're sick. You don't even know the virus is inside of you. So with the lysogenic pathway, you have the virus DNA that's injected into your cells. The virus DNA just sits there. It's usually, again, taken to the nucleus, where it's safe, right? Because that's where DNA belongs. The cell does not make viruses. It just has the DNA in it. It's just sitting there. So the cell's not going to die from that. But here's the kicker. Every single time that cell goes through mitosis, you guys remember mitosis, yes? Yeah, the cell reproduces. Every time that cell reproduces, all the new cells have the virus DNA in it. So every new cell has the viral DNA every time it goes through mitosis. Think about this a second. If it's on your skin, you have a whole completely new layer of skin every 27 days. Every 27 days, so that's how many, all those new cells that are created, continuing to be created, are going to have all the viral DNA. So a whole new layer every 27 days. And that's even faster if it's in your mouth or your esophagus, your intestines. It even reproduces faster. So they're reproducing frequently and all the time. So now you've got this virus DNA, it's sitting in your cell, and every time the cell goes through mitosis, now you have 2 cells with the virus DNA. Now you have 4 cells with the virus DNA. Now you have 8 cells with the virus DNA, so on and so on and so on. Okay? And then you're not sick. You don't feel sick at all. So you don't feel bad, you don't feel sick, you don't feel anything. And then for a reason they're not sure yet, it changes then to the lytic pathway. They don't know what causes it. Sometimes they can associate it with stress, but not always. So all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, this process goes up and out of the lysogenic pathway, and now starts doing the lytic pathway. That's when they start to feel sick. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let me give you a simple example first. How many of you guys have had a fever blister before? Fever blister? A few of you guys have? Okay, so fever blisters. I just assumed everybody had fever blisters when I was younger because, it was everybody in my family got it. When I got married, I found out No one in his family had ever had a fever blister, ever. I thought they were just freakish, but now I find that, no, I'm just the freakish one. So, a fever blister. So it's a herpes simplex 2 virus. Okay? Might be one. Can't remember which is which. Anyway, it's one of the herpes. You know there are lots of different viruses. It's not an STD, people. Okay, so there are lots of, we hear herpes and think, oh, STD. Yeah, no, there's a whole group of viruses in the herpes realm, so it's one of those. So, when you first get the virus, you're going to break out probably on the mucous membrane right here, or around the nose and mouth, and then your body fights it off. But then maybe a year later, it pops up again. You're thinking, wait, how is that even possible? Well, what happened is your body fought it off to a point to where it didn't cause any problems, but then that viral DNA just stayed in some of those cells. It's not reproducing, it's not making viruses, not killing cells, not doing anything, until somewhere down the line, maybe you have a fever, your body's stressed out, maybe you ate too many oranges, maybe you didn't get enough sleep, and all of a sudden, you get another fever blister again. The virus was never completely wiped out of your body. It went from the lytic pathway when you first got it, and then it switched over to the lysogenic pathway, where it just sat there and waited. Yeah, that's one example. Have any of you guys heard of shingles before? Shingles? I don't mean the stuff on the houses. Shingles isn't a disease. So chickenpox? Chickenpox, you guys, nobody's had chickenpox in here, right? No chickenpox? Okay, so I had chickenpox when I was a kid. You guys have vaccines for that now. So I had chickenpox when I was a little kid. And because of that, what happens is the body fought it off, but the chickenpox virus is kind of unique. And what happens is some of the virus gravitates towards the nerve cells, your neurons, the nerve cells, and it sits in there, and the lysogenic pathway just sits there. And maybe 25, 30 years down the road, someone has, again, they're not quite sure, but usually stress is a part of that. And what happens is you develop this disease called shingles. You get a rash. It's almost like having a really bad sunburn where you touch the skin and it's almost like it's a burn. Have you guys had sunburn before? It hurts. Yeah, it's like that. Sometimes it'll break out in sores. It just depends on how bad it is. That's shingles. And it typically goes away again, but your body kind of has to work to fight it off. But it's not completely gone. It sits. It just sits in there. So that's that lysogenic pathway. The AIDS virus, the HIV virus, is a similar way. You'll have people that test positive for AIDS, and then they're not sick. Until 20 years later, then they develop the disease, where their immune system is dying, and they have all sorts of crazy diseases. So, again, that lysogenic pathway compared to the lytic pathway, this is what they do. So in this case, you get this part, and you immediately get sick. This is what we're most familiar with. The second one, the lysogenic one, is where you got the virus, and it's like just sitting in there waiting. And it's not doing anything but reproducing every time those cells reproduce. So this is, when we talk about viral reproduction, these two are the ones we're talking about here. The last piece I want to talk about that goes along with this, because they just said viral reproduction and described the role of viruses in causing diseases. Okay, so we talked partially about it. Once enough of your cells die off, that's when you say you have the disease, you feel sick, right? But they asked specifically about a couple of diseases, so let's talk about the diseases a bit. Okay, so diseases. Again, when enough of your cells die, that's when you have symptoms. So when enough of the cells die, you're going to have symptoms from that. So again, typically we have a 7 to 14 day, for most viruses, we have a 7 to 14 day incubation period. That's when they're growing, when they're just building up numbers. Again, that's the most, if we go talk about the lytic pathway, that's what we're mostly talking about here. Your immune system responds. But usually it takes a little bit of time for your immune system to kick in. And it responds in a multitude of ways. One of the ways is antibodies, and I'm not going to talk about a lot of the responses. Again, let me tell you, take anatomy. It's a crying shame that we can't spend more time on this, but your immune system response is amazing. So antibodies are little chemicals. And these antibodies, they're like, have you guys seen those little cartoons or maybe on TV shows or something, and somebody gets a sign stuck on their back that says, "Kick me"? Yeah? Okay, and antibodies come like that sign. It sticks a sign on a cell that says, "Kill me." So these antibodies are chemicals, and they attach to the little receptors on the virus. Well, if those those virus cells are all stuck on the outside of those infected cells. They get stuck on there. And so when they see those antibody tags, your white blood cells will kill those cells. Okay? Sometimes they'll get stuck to the viruses floating around. Every time that antibody tag is there, your white blood cells kill that. They eat it, usually is what they do. And so the antibodies are ultimately, and I'm going to say kill, even though the viruses aren't dead, they put tags on them and it kills the viruses. It's a lot more complex in response than just that, but it kills the viruses and the infected cells. That's what your immune system does. It's got T cells and B cells and helper T cells and all sorts of crazy stuff that's in there. It's a really worthwhile thing to study. I'm going to bring this down a little bit so we can see a little bit more on my paper. Okay, so it's going to kill those viruses. It's going to kill the infected cells on here. Now, vaccines, the vast majority of vaccines that you guys have are all built like this. You basically have a dead or modified virus, so that in a perfect world it's not going to make you sick. It's injected into you. And usually, do you guys remember getting shots, like vaccines or anything? Yeah. Have you ever felt your arm after you get the shot? It's going to be warm right there. Because that's where all the viruses stuff are going in there, and so your body will have an immune response right in there. It'll get hot. That's one of the things, like fever, it gets hot right in that area. So it's injected in to cause an immune response. The whole purpose is to cause an immune response without you getting sick. Typically with this virus, the worst thing that can happen is you actually get the disease. So if you have the flu, vaccine, the worst thing that could happen to you is you get sick from the flu. Like for some reason the virus actually was viable and it made you sick from that. Unfortunately, if you're talking really serious diseases, sometimes you still have that possibility. Like I had the polio vaccine when I was a kid. You guys have never had the polio vaccine, right? We wiped it out, totally wiped it out. The only place the polio virus is still around is in labs throughout a couple of places in the world. So the only way it's getting out is if somebody decides to make a biological weapon out of it. So the polio vaccine, I have it, you don't, right? So the vaccine, unfortunately though, when people got injected for the vaccine for polio, there were a certain percent of the people, like maybe 0.1%, that they actually got the disease when they had the vaccine. The problem is it was kind of worth it. Without the vaccine, your chances of getting polio, and it's a crippling disease, so people couldn't breathe anymore. They had to have machines to make them enable them to breathe. They were paralyzed, things like that. So without the vaccine, your chances of getting polio were this high. With the vaccine, they were just a little bit higher because some people would get that. So it was smart to take the vaccine because you had those chances of without it, it was bad. So there are some viruses with the vaccines, there are some chances of you getting the disease with the vaccine. So typical vaccines. Have you guys ever taken antiviral medication? Anybody? You have the flu, or you've been around someone with the flu, you didn't go take like Theraflu or something like that? Antiviral medication is out there now, children. And what that means is if you take it within 48 hours of being exposed, it stops virus reproduction. I think Theraflu is an antiviral. I'm not for sure about that. So it's kind of like they figured out a way, some type of chemical, and I don't know all the chemistry associated with that, but they figured out some type of chemical to stop the reproductive process of that, which is kind of interesting. Now, with HIV, the reason it's so bad is because it attacks the immune system. The very cells that are supposed to be killing off the virus and the cells that have the virus are themselves the attack. They're what is attacked. So you can see this is a bad thing. So when someone has the HIV virus, they're getting into their immune cells. Once it kicks into the disease, so they have AIDS, they actually don't die from that. They die from other diseases that their immune system it's being attacked, so their immune system can't fight anything off. They die of diseases that people haven't died from in a long time. They die of really weird cancers because your immune system doesn't just kill off viruses and bacteria, it also kills off cancer cells. So those people that have AIDS will die of really strange cancers that someone with a healthy immune system, your immune system would just wipe that crap out, no problem. So they have issues there. It attacks the immune system. The other virus they want to talk about is the flu virus. And the reason this one is so bad is because it mutates. Okay, how much time do I have left? Okay, good. All right, so how many times have you guys had the flu before? Flu. Yeah, how many times have you had it? More than once? Yeah, because it's not the same flu virus. We say, we have the flu, and it's this group of symptoms. And there are a lot of different viruses, first of all, that can cause those symptoms. And then added to that, the flu virus does weird stuff. You know I told you it doesn't jump species? The flu virus can within a degree. So there are areas the CDC watches to try and predict, how bad's the flu season going to be this year? What kind of flu virus and so on and so on. Have you heard of the swine flu, the bird flu? Okay, so there's an area in China. China's hugely populous. There's an area in China where they have ducks and they have pigs and they have humans all living within the same. They're rural, and so they live in this area. It's really wet, so it's a breeding ground for a lot of diseases and stuff. And so they're watching this stuff, and because these animals and humans live in close contact with each other, they can actually jump species. So when the flu that pigs can get flu, and the flu is in the pig, if they're living closely enough with the humans, sometimes they can mutate and jump. And that's exactly what the flu virus does. So we have a breeding ground, a really weird breeding ground there. And so the CDC will watch, especially in China, certain areas of China, and then there are other areas where you can develop it too, but that's where the main body is. And then they try and watch the pathway and see, what is it that's coming this way? And so they have to do this about 6 months ahead of time. So what they do then is they make their flu virus vaccine. And so last I heard there were 3 different vaccines that could fit into one shot. And so they narrow it down to which 3 do you think are going to make it to the U.S. And so they have to do it ahead of time because they've got to make enough vaccines, right, for people? And so if they guess wrong, then the flu vaccine that you got is totally worthless. If they get it right, it's good for this year because over in China where these are originating, they're still cranking out new ones. They're mutating slightly. So the one that they're getting the vaccine for this year may have mutated slightly, just enough so that your body won't recognize it. So when we put these vaccines in ourselves, or fakes our body out and thinks, hey, I'm going to make an immune response to this so I can kill it, you have memory cells. I have cells in my body that have been there just for white blood cells against polio since I had the polio shot when I was like 10. And if that polio virus ever comes into contact with me, those memory cells recognize it, kick up a huge immune response, and wipe it out before I even get sick. That's how your immune system works. So if you had the flu last year, that particular flu virus, you'll never get sick from again. That's typically how it works. Now, even then, there are some variations. There are some viruses that you have to get booster shots for. Have you heard of booster shots? Some of you guys have, no? So there are some vaccines that you have to have booster shots for. So you got to think of little kids. They get them they start getting shots when they're like a year, a little bit less than that, and then they get them several times. When's the last time you guys had to go to the doctor and get shots? 7th grade, somewhere in there. 8th grade, maybe somewhere in there. So now you're probably not going to have to get shots for quite a while. But maybe did you guys get a tetanus shot? Anybody? Tetanus shot? Yeah, if you're really active outside, tetanus shot's a really good idea to have. And you have to do that one every 10 years or so. So that's when you have to have booster shots. Different viruses they're not all the same. They work in different ways, so it works like that. The last thing I want you to write down is the COVID. COVID is an RNA virus. So its nucleic acid is RNA. Now here's the kicker. Every single one of the vaccines you've gotten have been just what I told you about. They take the virus, they have a weakened form of it, and they make a shot from that so you can develop an immune response, right? The COVID vaccine is totally different. Completely and totally different. What they're injecting you with is mRNA from the virus. So they inject it into you, your cells take it in, and they're going to start making proteins. And those proteins are going to cause an immune response. Now, I personally am not appreciative of it because here's the way it goes. Typically when we have a vaccine, when we have a virus, we work years. Sometimes the vaccines can be made for them in 3 years, sometimes it takes 10 years, sometimes we never make a vaccine. With the COVID vaccine, what they did is they tried a new method of making a totally different vaccination. And then instead of doing all the testing, they jumped over that part and said, let's put it in humans. So there's a limited amount of testing here. So for me, as a scientific method, I'm thinking, hey, you skipped a part. That's a kind of important part. Yeah? So I'm not happy with them about them doing that, but the whole purpose was, hey, COVID is now, we need a vaccine now. You know how people want it now? So that was the reason it was okay to skip over a lot of the testing, and so now it's out there. So it's an mRNA virus, something that's never been put into mass humans ever before. So we'll see how you guys do. Okay, take your, oh, I need to stop this time. Last time I forgot to stop it.